Well, you guys asked, and as a result, you shall receive. The Klassiker took place on the Saturday, the 30th of November, and it resulted in a 1-1 draw, with Dortmund being the home team, Bayern the away team. And I felt like this was a predictable game in many senses. I felt like injuries on both sides swung the game in Bayern's favour, and I'll talk about that more in detail as I go through the analysis. But Kane going off after about half an hour for Thomas Muller, Anton coming off after about 10-15 minutes for Niklas Süle, disrupted the Dortmund game plan, I think, a little bit on, as I say, on both aspects, on how they were dealing with the Bayern Munich team and how they were defending uh, as a structure, and of all the moving pieces, it did sort of fall apart with Anton not being on the pitch. But still good credit to Bayern. They came back and equalised late on. They applied a lot more pressure in the second half, and I think in the end, a draw is a fair result. I thought both managers sort of tactically duelled each other well. It was a really good contest, and both provided bits of quality. But we're going to go over the Dortmund attacking phase first. Dortmund built up in a sort of 2-4-4, I guess you could say, or 2-3-2-3, with Nemencha in between Ben Sebaini and Ryerson. Sabitzer pushed on a lot more forward than Gross was. Gross was sort of the in between pivot and attacking midfielder, whereas Sabitzer was the attacking midfielder that dropped deep to help overload these central areas and provide a bit of numerical superiority to help try and get Dortmund up the pitch. Very narrow front three with Binu Gittins and Bayer coming in really tight to Guirassy, essentially narrowing up the Bayern back three that remained, and it became a back three because, as we know, Bayern Munich press high. They go man for man, they go aggressive, and they try and win the ball back as quick as possible. So it would be Musiala and Kane pushed onto the two centre-backs, Sane and Tell pushed onto the two full-backs, Goretzka would try and engage Nemencha, Kimmich would come across to Gross, Kim would come from the defence and engage with Sabitzer, even to the point where Sabitzer dropped deep to try and get on the ball. Kim would follow him deep into the opposition half, just as per the role. Davis and Lehmer tucked in to take care of the wingers, with Upamecano taking care of Guirassy in this area. And to be fair to Dortmund, they had a multiple amount of ways to play through to the same target, and that adds to the versatility and the quality of that front three. And so it would be through going long, straight from Kobel, or they tried to sucker the press back onto him. They couldn't open him up the way they wanted. You get Anton playing the ball up to Kobel to play the ball to Guirassy, who would drop in a little bit more, pulling up a Mancano a little bit deeper, maybe even coming a bit deeper than either Gross or Sabitzer, depending on their positions, to just create space in behind the Bayern defensive line. Kobel could find him with the long passes. He could either hold the ball up, play it short, or look for the runs in behind of Binu Gittins and Bayer, which is, I think, a massive reason as to why they are so narrow. It could also be with playing through to the fullback area, say getting Ryerson or Ben Sebaini on the ball, to allow Guirassy to come into this area, past, again, Sabitzer, past any supporting midfielders to look for the ball short, creating the opportunity for the Bayern wingers to make movements inside or outside of their markers, and in essence pushing that Bayern Munich defence further back because they're worried about the pace in behind, and those two could stretch that pitch for Bayern Munich and create more space for Dortmund to either play it into Guirassy or maybe use him as a bit of a decoy that he's dragged us from Mancano so out of position. The ricochet and ripple effect is that creates space elsewhere that Sabitzer or Gross can move into. They can then play forward to the forward runs of Binu Gittins or Bayer into that space, or Sabitzer as well, who's fantastic working in tandem with Guirassy, that if Guirassy pulls deep and creates space, Sabitzer's reading of situations and his intelligence during the game to make those movements at the right time into the space created is top draw. I loved him as a Manchester United fan. I thought he was excellent. I was gutted when we didn't make his loan permanent. But I think Dortmund have got such a classy player with him that complements Guirassy brilliantly. Or if they felt like they couldn't progress through that area, or they just wanted to go with a different tactic and that opening was on because of the press from Bayern, getting the ball to Nemencha. Now, Nemencha has had a Gravenberg level season in the sense he's been redefined in being this deeper role for Dortmund, and he's been exceptional. He's been fantastic, especially within possession. His press resistance, his frame as well, makes it hard for players to press him and get tackles in because he's gangly and awkward, and he's got a good physique to him, so he can keep him at arm's length. He can use his body well, and the way he has fantastic ball control to take it round them and not just pass forward with a really good passing range, but carry it forward long stretches. He's a brilliant midfield player that hasn't really how to be generous about this, hasn't really done much since he's joined Dortmund. But this season under Nuri Sahin, he's found a new role and it's complementing the team brilliantly. He's been fantastic, especially in possession. And he is adapting well to the holding midfield role off the ball. I thought he was quality in dealing with the press of Bayern, which we know can be heavy metal. We know can be, pretty full on and full throttle. And, his ability to just ride moments, pick the right pass and get it forward is really good. And again, the close proximity of the midfield and the forward line helps that as well. And so once he gets the turn again, he can play that run into Graf. So again, once he gets the turn, he can play that ball into Guirassí's feet, who can then play it off to Bayern Gittins, and they could get up the field that way. But what would the shape look like once they did push forward? When Dortmund would push higher up, it would be with a very central overload. The only sort of differing moving part of this would be you'd sometimes get Nemencha moving in between the two centre-backs to provide that overload in these areas to draw Bayern Munich's press a bit further up the pitch, because Bayern Munich would still look to press high in these areas, and Gross would then provide the pivot to connect that back three to the forward line. Or Nemencha could sit in front of the centre-back pairing and Gross could move even more forward and help overload that forward line with Kimmich again dropping in to help him, because Bayern, as I said, still retain their man-to-man qualities. The source of width within this team would be the fullbacks. Ryerson and Ben Sabiani moving forward from fullback would still be tracked by the wide players. And the way they would try and create chances within this area is just this close proximity and overload of players within the central areas. As Bayer and Bayern Gittins coming in centrally, Gross and Sabitzer moving forward. Guirassy still offering the deeper option to try and look for the pass from deep, with dragging Upamecano with him. And I will give Upamecano his credit. I'm not his greatest fan. I don't think he's an amazing defender. I think he's got too many mistakes in him. He defended Guirassy really well in this game, physically competed with him well, and won a good amount of duels. I would say that Upamecano came up victorious, but Guirassy was still a threat and he could still get a hold of the ball. And as I say, just create that back-to-front option for Dortmund, which is so crucial in their play. But the one thing he did do, which isn't anything Upamecano can really do about, is with those movements and just creating that space, the movement from the likes of Bayern Gittins, from Bayer, did cause Lima and Davis a lot of problems. More so Bayern Gittins on this left-hand side. Bayer got the ball a couple times on the right-hand side for Dortmund, but Bayern Gittins was the threat. His pace, his breakaway pace as well against Lima had him for toast. And having Schlotterbeck on that side, I think, is a massive key, because Schlotterbeck's passing from deep is fantastic. He got the assist for the goal. And as much as I'm not the biggest fan of very narrow wingers, the one quality it does offer, which I think works well for this Dortmund team, is that if a player starts out wide, even if a fullback doesn't maybe have the ability to match them for pace, they can predict the movement at least. Like when the player's out wide, you know the movement's going to be from out to in. Whereas when they're narrow and they're on your shoulder, you don't have a lot of time to react to their movement, especially if they've got great acceleration as Bayern Gittins does. So that pass can go in. He can pull off into the wide area. He can move inside of you, especially once that space has been created by Guirassy's movement. So it's a lot harder to track. You've got a lot less time to react to the movement as well. So if you've already got a disadvantage with the pace, you lose that battle. And that's what happened for the goal. Bayern Gittins using his acceleration, getting away from Lema and putting in a really good goal against Manuel Neuer. But he did it a few times, Schlotterbeck, with his back-to-front passing, and he's got a real good amount of technical quality. So that's how Dortmund attacked. How did they defend? A question you always have to ask when you're going into the defensive stage of a team is, did they press high? Were they in a mid-block or were they in a low block? And Dortmund were all three. I felt like they did every stage of the defensive idea pretty well. They did try and go high man-to-man on Bayern Munich. They did sit into a mid-block once Bayern had gotten through that initial build-up phase, and then they did sit deep when Bayern had the overload and the way they have the numerical superiority of pushing a lot of players into attack. And they did decently well at both. Obviously, they lost the game late on. Or didn't lose the game, but lost 2 points late on. And at the start, when they went man-to-man, it was as you'd expect. Bayern Munich in their 2-4-4. Kimmich and Goretzka in between the two fullbacks, who are a little bit more narrow. Tell and Sani providing the width high up. Upamecano and Kim showing for the ball, with Musiala in line with Kane. And Dortmund matched that up. 4 at the back, the 4 in midfield, and the 2 up front with Sabitzer. And, did decently well. Put a bit of pressure on. The only difference with Bayern as opposed to Dortmund is they have the best technical goalkeeper in the world, with his passing and his ability to be that extra man. Already adds to a bit of numerical superiority. If Guirassy comes over to press Neuer if he has the ball, then that pass to Upamecano becomes free. And to be fair to Dortmund, they were willing to lose ground in that deeper area. It was the midfield they couldn't afford to lose the ground. So once that happened, once the press was beaten from Neuer, they would drop off and they would, I guess, just accept defeat. Guirassy or Sabitzer would do their best to shadow the press into the centre-back, but Neuer's range of passing still enables that a possibility. His passing wasn't as good as well, Neuer, as it typically tends to be. He gave the ball away quite a lot in certain areas, but all it needs to do is work a few times and you get through that way. And then as Bayern pushed a little bit further up the pitch, as I'll do, the formation and players started to interchange and create new possibilities. So it changed for Dortmund when Bayern pushed up the pitch, as I said. And while initially it would stick to the 2-4-4, it would change. And I'll go over the changes that happened as play moved on. And the one change that would come initially from a Dortmund point of view is Nemencha would drop into Kane. He would be the holding midfielder in between the lines, protecting that zone between defence and midfield, and allowing Sabitzer to drop on into Goretzka, and Guirassy would try and manage the two centre-backs. If starting off from Meccano, if the pass went to Kim, he would try and shadow the pass back and close Kim down while that happened. And you may ask, who is picking up Musiala? Anton would come from defence to engage with Musiala. Even in situations that did happen, where maybe Kimmich would start moving out into his right-back position in this area, Gross would follow suit. Goretzka coming into this area here to allow space for Musiala to drop in. Anton would follow him up and prevent him from becoming an easy pass for the defender, so he can get on the ball, turn, and create quality from there, and use his dribbling ability to move the ball further up the pitch and find the run of Tell, find the run of Sane in these areas who have great pace, who can get in behind. And Bayern, as much as they look to build up short and you try and overload those deeper areas to get the ball up the pitch quicker with Kimmich and the likes of Musiala dropping in, they have a fantastic transitional threat of the wide players. And even in the case that Sabitzer moved on to Kim, if he felt like he could press, which would bring Nemencha back onto Goretzka, then that wouldn't change Anton's positioning. He would still track Musiala. And having Nemencha back on Kane just allowed Schlotterbeck to manage that space in between the fullbacks and prevent that from becoming too much of a disaster. So they always had that superiority in the defensive edge. Where this did change is, as I said, after about 15 minutes, Anton went off with an injury. Up until that, he did a really good job of Musiala. I don't think Musiala touched the ball much in that first 15 minutes. And on came Niklas Süle, who wasn't as equipped to try and come out into these areas and engage with Musiala. He doesn't have the mobility. He's not as comfortable defending that high up the pitch aggressively. It wasn't his style. He tried it, I think, once after he first came on. Didn't really get close, left too much space that he couldn't get back in, and he didn't really do it again. He'd stay deep, and he'd stay as part of a back four as opposed to anything else. So this then meant that Sabitzer or Nemencha or Gross had a lot more to deal with in that line, and it meant that Schlotterbeck had to focus on dealing with Kane a bit more, and then that became more of a job for the two centre-backs as opposed to anything else with Harry Kane. But obviously Bayern looked to overload the attacking areas pretty quickly if they can't use the direct option, and that would be with Kimmich coming into the defensive line, Goretzka offering the pivot, Musiala would also come deep, but then the fullbacks would start pushing forward and creating the little triangles on their side to help get the ball up the pitch. Binu Gittins and Bayer would track the runs of the fullbacks to just, say, prevent that from becoming an issue, whether that was inside or outside. And maybe them coming inside allowed Ben Sebaini and Ryerson to move wider and get into these areas and focus on their wide players. And to be fair, once that change happened with Kimmich moving deeper, Gross could also drop off and perform as part of the midfield setup because Sabitzer would move forward with Guirassy to perform as part of a front two to manage that back three. They were always leaving themselves a man down, but it's a lot easier to cover with two players in that back three than it is with just Guirassy, who would never have coped. So it meant that Nemencha and Gross could drop in as part of the midfield too, try and manage Goretzka and Musiala a little bit more, which came more onto the midfield as Musiala's positioning now had a bit more freedom without Süle. Also, a change came with Harry Kane's injury that benefited Bayern Munich, and that was him being replaced by another 25, Thomas Müller, who wouldn't obviously play as a number 9 in the way that Harry Kane would. He'd drop off, he'd come into the half space a little bit more, he'd look for the ball deeper, and having Müller and Musiala in these areas to ask questions of that Dortmund shape was a lot more key in the end. He also offered a lot more flexibility, Müller, with Sane on this side. He could pull out wide, allowing Sane to come into the central area to look for the ball in these areas where he could, again, ask questions of Ben Sebaini. Does he stay out wide with Müller? Does he come inside to Sane? Sane could then use his dribbling to move inside and under pressure and overload those central areas, pull markers away from their man. So with the likes of Musiala getting space to be able to create from these areas, it then meant that Dortmund had to drop in a lot quicker when they were on the back foot a lot for the second half because they were struggling with that space in behind and who to pick up Musiala, who to pick up Muller, and the changes that would come from that. And then this was the shape in the low block. It would be with a 4-1-4-1 with Guirassy dropping in a lot deeper on top of that midfield four, who would look to try and congest the centre of the pitch, just keep the box very well protected with the numerical superiority. Again, Bainu, Gittins and Bayer would look after the wide areas, get out to the wide man, allowing the back four to narrow up within the box. But the problem with being so low, as much as they protected the box really well, this created two difficulties. One would be because they were so deep, Kimmich could get on the ball here and get close enough to the box without any real pressure to be able to create from these areas and find those passes, find those difficult bits of quality that can unlock defences and structures and create from there. And, once you give a player like Kimmich time and space on the ball, he's going to use it to hurt you. Another one was especially in the second half with Sula up against Musiala. Musiala could find space in the half space in these areas and create from here and look to really use his magic to create opportunities, create chances for himself, use his one-touch play interchange with the likes of Davis and Tell in these areas and run at players. And the fact he was given a little bit more space without Anton just meant that Musiala had more and more to be able to work with and get into the box. Caused Dortmund a lot of trouble and they just didn't really have answers for it. And then that ended up with them breaking down Dortmund, breaking down the shape and winning the game. Or not winning the game, drawing the game. I keep thinking it's a win because it was so late on. It must have felt like that. But full credit to both. I felt like Dortmund did defend really well in each of their phases. It was just that Bayern had such quality within the team that they could find answers. The substitution of Muller, giving them an extra dimension that made them a lot more fluid in that area of the pitch with him and Sane interchanging. And then Elise, when Elise came on and created the goal, that it was just hard to contend with that much quality in defence and maybe dropped far too deep when they went into their defensive phase because, as I say, it just allowed Bayern Munich to push so far up the pitch that they could get close enough to the goal where they had basically their entire team attacking the Dortmund goal. But 1-1, I thought it was fair in the end. I thought both teams offered their quality, and this deeper base gave Dortmund a place where they could counter-attack from as well when it did happen, with Bainu Gittins, with Bayer, with Guirassy being able to get them up the pitch. So, point shared, I think it's a good away point for Bayern Munich. I think it's a good home point for Dortmund. And an interesting battle tactically. I thought it was a very, very, very well-rounded game. But I'd love to know what you guys think, as always. Like the video if you like it, dislike it if you disliked it, comment down below and tell me why either way, and subscribe if you want to see more. In a bit, lads.